So welcome, Holly, to this conversation about co-creating the third attractor. I'm very happy to have you here.
I'm so delighted to be here, Danielle. I can't wait for this conversation.
Yes, I felt the same. So I always start with one single question. Are you familiar with the concept of the third attractor?
I am, and having listened to some of your other interviews, I
Yeah.
love the description of it. So please feel free, because I have some questions also. So
No. My question goes, could you, in your own words, describe what you understand what the third attractor is?
um, yes, I can, and happy to. My awareness of the third attractor, not being Daniel and living in his mind and heart, the first attractor. And this was one of my questions. I'm really eager to talk about this briefly with you. I don't think it's our
Mm-hmm.
whole topic, but he doesn't describe the attractors in this way, but my understanding of the first attractor being the developmentalist that I am, I think of most of the world in developmental terms, but the first attractor is really early concrete tier. It's the shadow of the concrete tier, a regression to tribal worlds where tightly bonded conformist societies are dominated by the rules and the norms and the agreements that they make, which are also rivalrous with competing tribes and communities. In our world, it's mostly communities, not tribes, but it creates fragility because they're sects. They're very distinct, separate forms of coherent forms, but distinct and competing, and therefore really not functional in a broader global world. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's first attractor will lead to chaos.
Yeah.
The second attractor, as I understand it from a developmental perspective, is our current industrial, technologic, very modern and slightly postmodern world, hyperachieving, expert-driven, this is early subtle tier, in Terry O'Fallon's model. That's what I've studied mostly. I've studied spiral dynamics in Kim Wilber's model and have really studied Terry's. But so the challenge, the shadow, if you will, of the second attractor or this particular early subtle tier is it's locked in extraction and competition and defending what we have at a much more competitive stage than the early tribal. But it was likely it will collapse because there aren't adequate resources. We have not moved as a species into the late subtle tier, which would be pluralism and construct aware, or um, you know green stage would be the first stage of that. We're beginning to, younger generations are moving into that tier. But anyway, that was a lot of complex mumbo jumbo about
Mm.
development, but that's how I see the attractors. Um, and certainly Daniel doesn't talk about them as shadow of developmental stages, but that's what they are. Literally, there's nothing wrong with those stages, but when we don't fully grow into the form of that stage and then organically move to the next, we end up in as shadow beings, shadow communities, shadow cultures.
I agree with that. If I can respond to
Yeah.
this part, what what I hear him say is slightly different, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I hear him say that with the meta crisis or poly crisis or however we call it or everybody calls it, the shadow can lead to two different outcomes. I wouldn't say that he even would make a stage difference, but he is more or less saying we push the edge so far, and especially the modernist edge and postmodern modernity couldn't kind of could not make sense of it. So it's still the modernist edge that drives us into chaos and this polycrisis. And I hear him say that the first and second attractors are more or less this shadow of modernism will either lead to chaos and then a tribalism, like a regression into tribalism, or it will lead to autocracy, technocracy and autocracy, like when the Elon Musks of this world will reign
Mhm.
and more or less command everything else. So it's either an autocracy or chaos, tribal chaos, because everything falls apart.
So so what you're suggesting, it's not, because we currently are living in these two extremities, right? Of, 30% of the human population has not made it yet out of the concrete stage and is very early developmentally
Yeah,
unable to even participate in the modern world fully. And, thus our schism in our current socio-political systems. And then those of us who've been participating in a modern or postmodern world, the shadow will drive us back to a former tribalism. I can see that.
exactly.
I just think that
Yeah,
we are also dealing with the shadow of the 30% of humanity who never made it to modernism. Um, and and so we have these two, very significant challenges, all shadow based. Yeah, anyway, that
yeah. And we can leave it with this, because our main point is actually that
getting to the third
you
attractor.
and I, you and I and Daniel would agree that what we want to find
Yeah.
out is how can we create a
Mhm.
third attractor, or how would a third attractor need to look like so that it would be so attractive that people could kind of lean into the third possibility and act differently, and actually start to act so that the meta crisis or polycrisis could be turned around or changed. Or
Yeah.
and I'm very aware that the idea that the whole world, I'm not somebody that believes in a big shift where the whole world will shift into another
Yeah.
consciousness and then everything will be done. No, I don't believe that, but I do believe that we can think about how we could prototype a
Mhm.
different way of being together, a different way of interacting together, a different way of doing business, doing education, and all these very also this right quadrant things, and that this could start to create a momentum that could be so attractive that it would pull more people in, and that we would have a chance to actually have cultural change that goes into a better direction.
Oh, may it be so.
Exactly.
Oh, and like you, I know that some of us and potentially many of us can accomplish that. And it's um, having listened to some of your other interviews, I'm on the end of the spectrum with, I think we do have to start with individual orientation to becoming the humans
Mm-hmm.
that literally can guide us, lead us, at least step fully into that form of being, who is much more evolved and aware and conscious and capable of living that third attractor kind of life, before we can competently create culture and infrastructure and systems. I don't think that we are capable of building those things now because we are not the humans. That,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a small, very, very small portion of us are those humans, but it's going to take many more of us to step into
So
that level.
I totally agree. And I would be very curious to hear from you if you could time travel and step into a village, a country that would live the third attractor life, whatever that means, like this idea that we have, because you just said we have to transform ourselves first before we are capable of living that third attractor life. So how would it be? How would it look like to step into this third attractor village? What would you see?
You know, what's interesting is I do time travel. I live
Good.
I live some part of my life outside of space-time at this point, and I do have community around me that is also living in that way. People I've worked with and other friends. And so I guess I envision that in this, if we were call a village of, I'm just going to call it a village of living portals because that's what I'm trying to create. People who are, have done the requisite reclamation of their lost parts to bring in their power, who've become aligned with their soul, who've become amplified in their creative life force, and who are attuned to the planet and to the cosmos, the sacred geometry that lives within us and around us. So we literally become channels for what can be sourced through us. We are quite capable as those beings of generating innovation because we are now creators. We are capable of imagining and building and doing things from a place we can't currently imagine because most of us are not that form. And so anything that we could possibly need, we can ultimately build co-creating. So every one of those humans, who is really kind of living a different form of being human at that point, is bringing their very unique, idiosyncratic, innate, soul-led gifts to the world, multifaceted gifts. And when we co-create together from there, we won't be solving problems. We'll be creating, we'll be creating things that have never been imagined because we're now living from a different paradigm and therefore living in the world in a different way. I think the earth will respond. This is my imagination. I think the earth will respond to us differently. The cosmos will always be there for us. Now living this life, I stopped worrying about sort of daily, sort of real world, 3D world, material world things a couple of years ago because I started living in such a state of synchronicity that I don't have to think about creating things that live in the material world. It arrives, it shows up for me. Everything I need shows up when you live in that state of synchronicity. So I think I don't, I'm imagining that when we're a community of those people, it's not anything we really have experienced historically, at least in our, current contemporary imagination of history. Probably those of us who were in Lemuria or Atlantis or wherever had some experience of this, but depends on what you believe.
Yeah, but let's dive into trying to figure out what are some qualities that we feel like, because I think you and I, we both have an inner sense what would need to be qualities or what would the atmosphere be of a community that can live from that place, no?
And I will respond to that question, but I'll also say that my work in the world is less about what the community looks like and more about how do we become the individuals who ultimately create that community. I don't literally have a lot of imagination about what will occur at community level. I know that when we are whole and sovereign and not hijacked by our shadow and the competition and the fear that is resident in most humans now, when we are oriented beyond self-interest we make choices that serve the whole across time, now and in the future. I care as much about, generation 7 years out, 7 generations out as I do my own children. And so I've become a conduit and a part of a web. Um, I'm regeneratively creative. I never stop living my life force. So I live from abundance and life force rather than fear. And I have no worries about, lack or inadequacy or competing with others, because I know that I will always receive what is mine to receive that will support my life force. And I'm attuned to the animate, interconnected reality that we truly inhabit here on the planet, as opposed to this discrete, materialistic, mechanized version of reality that we've been living for 800 years. So
Mhm.
from that place, and if all humans in this imaginal village lived in that way, I can only imagine what's possible, what we might be able to create together. I don't, it's not been in existence that I'm aware of, so I don't know. But I think those are the kinds of people that I would want and imagine to inhabit such a village.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and my emphasis is probably slightly different. It's interesting, yeah, because I'm very much interested in what does it mean when people wake up. We call it wake up. It's the same thing that you're pointing to, when people live from the source, when we wake up and are animated by spirit who has created the universe. And when people wake up, normally waking up was a very individualistic thing, like sitting in meditation, waking up for 20 years in a cave, in this awakened state. People didn't have to interact with each other. And what we are very interested in is what happens when we wake up and want to stay awake and then come together with other people and
Mhm.
come from the same place, but also find that there is obviously always, as long as we are in these bodies, in this world, there is tension, there is negotiation in terms of where are we going together, what let's say when you have an intuition and I have an intuition, and but we are committed that we are in the same thing together. So there is a almost like a negotiation between our intuitions, if we want to do that as a community, you know what I mean? And that I find very interesting. And how do we then live our lives fully from that free place, and at the same time aware that it's not just single strings of intuition that move forward, but I have a strong sense that coherence will be
Yep.
a very important
Yep.
thing that needs to happen.
Yeah. Wait, so I'm going to answer this as best I can, not having experienced what you're describing at writ large, and shift. I'm going to shift an assumption you made. Um, so my experience has been that when I am whole, radically whole, so I've reclaimed all my lost parts from time space. Um, I am aligned with my soul, so I am internally coherent, and this is basic quantum physics. I then, as I continue to practice that, and you could call that waking up, though waking up is generally a spiritual endeavor versus, sort of a physical in your body endeavor. Um, and when I am living that form, I then eventually create an external coherence with everything around me, which causes me to become radiant, to radiate that spirit, my soul, my individuated expression of soul, um, and create superposition and then synchronicity. So, what you describe as having to negotiate with others who are awake and perhaps internally coherent, I see a little differently. I don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as a matter of I need to limit or um, somehow dampen the life force that lives in me in order to live with you and to co-create with you. I see that as I am internally coherent, ultimately becoming radiant, externally coherent, the people and the situations and the scenarios that resonate with my particular form of being, my internally coherent, show up. And there isn't a need to negotiate. It is actually a co-creation as those energies coalesce. And you and I, if our if our internally coherent life force doesn't mesh fully, that's fine. I don't need to mesh and co-create with every other human in that community. I'm going to co-create with those whose life force and coherent energies align with mine, and therefore we're going to become a form, and ultimately metaform that is coherent and living in synchronicity. Um, I think some of what I think I hear you describing, and I'm not sure, so this is making an assumption I'm making, is that most of the time when we wake up, we've still not reclaimed fully all our innate powers from lost soul parts or aligned with purpose fully. And therefore, we are still negotiating because we don't have a sourced clarity truly living as life force in us. So it's a stage in this process of becoming really truly coherent. Um, I see that a lot of time. People I work with who
Mm-hmm.
they're awake. They're mostly aligned. They're on their path. They're doing the work, and they're like, but still, I'm still having relationship issues. I'm still not abundant. I'm still not quite fully formed is that channel. And my awareness has been that as we reclaim lost parts, and I can speak more about that. It's a very specific process. It's not just waking up. That it literally transforms their experience and becoming completely coherent, and then stepping into synchronicity and magic.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in my experience, worldview, lineage, teaching, however we want to call it,
Right.
there is a possibility that you can wake up and be fully aligned with the evolutionary impulse, with the driving force, and that even allows you to look into these shadow parts even clearer and find them, put them together. But it doesn't, the life force itself, I'm sure you would agree, doesn't need me to be perfect to be able to come through me.
Right.
And I find that a very important insight, that we actually can wake up to what we are describing here without having to be perfect first.
Completely. Absolutely. Completely. I mean, perfection is
Exactly.
allowed as a human.
Exactly. No,
No,
it's not. Yeah, it's not
yeah,
possible. And
yeah,
Andrew always said you can experience perfection, but you cannot be perfection. And I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
very, very
yeah,
perfectly said.
yeah.
And so, but then we are talking about imperfect human beings that come together to create the new world, the third attractor, the better world, the four quadrant approach for a better culture, better life. And when we are thinking imperfect people, we then for me comes in the question of negotiation, and probably
Uh,
negotiation is not the right word. We could also say how do we work with the tension that then is created, and also how do we honor uh, differences in depth, or would you agree that you can see different levels of awakening or being aligned with this life force, and that this is something that we want to, or I believe this is something we want to honor, that there is a hierarchy of depths that as soon as you think community or people coming together, I think should and needs to be respected, because it points, it has a verticality. Some people in some moments have a higher view on a topic than other people have, or a clearer view, or a less obstructed view here.
Yeah, I agree.
And then
yes.
it gets very interesting. How do you, again, negotiate this? How do all people then in such a community recognize we call it natural hierarchy? It's quite a nice term to use. Like, who recognizes what is really going on? Who has the highest wisdom in this moment? And that can change in any moment, any time. But is everybody that is part of what needs to happen or wants to happen here aware of these distinctions in insight?
Yeah. And Daniela, you're asking a question about community that I literally cannot answer. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have adequate responses to that question, because I don't think I mean, number one, there aren't actually enough humans right now who are far enough along that we have been able to create these kinds of communities. I mean, certainly spiritual communities, like you've been part of, I've been part of, tend to have more people who are, you're using the word awake, and I don't use that word anymore. My own bias, I guess, is that awakeness tends to speak to the transcendent qualities of consciousness as opposed to the embodied qualities. So I've stopped using that word. Don't have anything against it. It just doesn't really express for me what the work I do in the world. And so from my own experience, there are a lot of awake people who've not yet embodied their awakeness, and therefore they're able to speak about, think about, have an experience of, but not yet fully step into the embodied form and use that life force from that place. And so my own experience is there aren't enough people on the planet to even imagine what a community would look like. I mean, I have, hundreds of colleagues. I have hundreds of former clients. I have lots of friends who are, in these arenas with, like you described, varying levels of readiness is a word I use, readiness to live that kind of life. And I witness all of those things. It's fascinating to be able to see the whole range, as a development. I can see the range, and I can meet someone and see them and have love and compassion for where they are, and recognize I can't speak about particular things with this human because they're not going to understand what I'm saying. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think it is a very important question. I understand a little better what you mean by negotiation now.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because I understand why you're saying you didn't use the word awakening anymore. And for me, that is exactly the reason why I excessively use the word awakening.
Okay.
But I agree with you. I want to point out that it doesn't just mean transcendence, but it means that awakening is the ground from which we live our lives, fully
No.
embodied. So our ashram has the name Manifest Nirvana.
No, I love that. I love that name.
Which is exactly the non-dual embrace of
No.
transcendence and manifestation. So especially in the last 8 years of Andrew's teaching, he was pointing or so strongly towards this non-dual embrace of being and becoming, of transcendence and manifest, and also to embrace all of our humanity as part of this non-dual awakening. But I feel strongly that, especially in the integral scene, or however we want to call it, there is a tendency to forget about awakening for these reasons, and I understand the reasons, because too many people probably just jumped off into transcendence without accepting that there is also a manifest. But here in Tiruvannamalai, where I live, Advaita and Neo-Advaita are big, and I don't know if you know, the Advaitans, they say everything is a dream. There is nothing you can do. There is no doer. Nothing can be done.
Mhm.
And then you see all these people that are lost, because if it's not a true, deep, transcendent experience that somebody has, where it's probable that you could experience that this is all a dream and you are free and out of the dream, when it's only words that tell you there is no doer and nothing can be done, it's so disempowering and so
Yeah.
victimizing, and I can't stand it. So
Yeah. Why
everything
doesn't
that
God just bring
victimizes
me?
people.
Yeah, I was just like, why doesn't God just bring me that thing I need?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so much
Exactly.
of what the New Age waking up has meant. And, having lived in Northern California for a while, I experienced a lot of that. And um, I am a manifester in human design. And so I didn't have any trouble with like staying in the doing part. I was never able to transcend the doing. It's been a shadow for me, is stop doing so much, and learn to live from that creative life force. That was actually, some of the shadow I had to learn. And just so much of the new age spiritual world has been that transcendent waking up. Um, and I hear that is definitely not your awareness of the word or what is needed in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think your question about how do we live, together in harmony, co-creating with varying levels of awakeness or readiness, to live as these channels of sourced beingness. And um, I don't have a question. I mean, an answer to that. I think it's a marvelous question. I think for me, I got to start at, okay, I'm trying to help more of us become that, like
Mm-hmm.
in the way that I have experienced in my own life, deep personal development work, and then deep spiritual work. And that all wasn't enough. Like it still didn't get me there. And so because I was a channel, even at that point, I innovated, God, source sent me how to do it. And, in my
Mm-hmm.
way that, like, oh, okay, here we are. This for me, people like me, I don't know. This is another way to
Mm-hmm.
become whole, aligned, amplified as creator life force and attuned to the cosmos and living as my own form of sacred geometry. And I know from here I have become a prolific creator. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, so much so that there's just there isn't enough time in the day for all the things that want to come through me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling more productive and alive and empowered now than ever. And I'm not a spring chicken. And it's amazing to be this age in life and like, oh, now I'm finally alive.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
creating more of us who are in this form maybe is.
Yeah, yeah, no, that sounds wonderful. I'm curious to hear a little more how do you help people to get to that place? Is it just integrating the shadow parts, or what is involved? How
Yeah.
do you approach it?
And so I'll just start with, this has taken me close to 40 years and probably many many lifetimes to be available to what wants to come
Mm-hmm.
through now. And this newest form of my work called the Living Portal has 4 pillars. So there's 4 distinct elements of the work. And the first pillar that I call reclaiming radical wholeness, you might call just shadow work, but it's more than that. I literally help people get in touch with parts of themselves. I call the lost parts of themselves. And I trained in voice dialogue and IFS and have been
Mm-hmm.
using those tools for decades. But what came through the last few years, literally came through as channeled awareness, is that these parts they're lost in time and space. We come to a current lifetime with these wounds to heal. We create the circumstances in which we'll be most, we'll be set up to have an experience to encounter ourselves and have an awareness of what internally needs to be resolved. And they are related to karmic threads. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
and so I gained this awareness. It came through me and literally help people reclaim parts from across time and space. So we're resolving karmic threads. I know this sounds fantastical and ludicrous, but it's real. I've been doing it in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
do it with clients now. And so when these parts come back to us over time, they become integrated in a way that's not like typical psychotherapeutic language. They don't like merge and come inside and it's gone, poof. It's
Mm-hmm.
like literally they come in parallel with us. They come coherent. They are sovereign beings who bring not only as we resolve the wound, the karmic thread, then the gift emerges and it becomes a facet of purpose to which we had no awareness. So there are things
Mm-hmm.
about my soul that I didn't know because it was lost, and it's been showing up as a wound. And when I reclaim it, it becomes the gift. And so we end
Mm-hmm.
up with multiple of these parts now newly in our lives. And each time you reclaim one of these parts, the power that shows up from that lost part is phenomenal. This was one of the first things I had an awareness of, a decade or so ago. It's like, oh my gosh, I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea I had this power. And I have certainly not been expressing it. Oh, yeah, it showed up as a personality quirk or a wound. But the personality quirks we have are usually parts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's first step. And I have this whole methodology that has emerged over time to resolve those parts, reclaim them, integrate. And when we reclaim enough of these, we become more and more and more whole, more of
Mm-hmm.
more of our full, true, sovereign, soulful selves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second pillar is aligning with soul. So as these parts come in and we help them express their gifts, we become more and more aligned with the truth of our entire soul, not just some part. Um, the third part is actually what happens when these parts begin to experiment, to act in the world from their full sovereign selves. And that actually begins to enunciate, to amplify our life force that had been dampened down because we've been constrained as fractured self. And
Mm-hmm.
then the fourth pillar is attuning, learning to attune to the earth and the cosmos, because in this new form, we are more coherent and then we become more radiant. And it's kind of hard, actually, it's actually pretty hard to live on this planet as a pure, as a more pure, radiant being. And I'm not talking perfection here. I'm still reclaiming parts, believe it or not. We become more radiant, and it's tough to live on this
Mm-hmm.
dense planet. Um, and so learning to attune to the earth, who is our greatest ally, and tap into that energy that is literally part of what formed us as humans. The earth's energy, the Schumann resonance, actually was a part of our creation. And most of us have become very separate and disparate in, the materialist paradigm. So reconnecting to the planet and then the cosmos in a bigger way, we begin to enliven our natural sacred geometry. Everything in our human form is literally working like sacred geometry. We just treat it like a machine. So as we attune to nature and cosmos, we become again much more coherent at a, at a meta level, at a cosmic level.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question here.
Yeah.
Where I try to connect my own experience and in your approach is, if somebody would integrate, I understand it never happens, but if somebody would integrate all these parts,
Mhm.
are you saying that this then automatically aligns him or her with the life force, with the evolutionary impulse, with source?
So it
Because
begins, yeah, it optimizes the conditions. What it does, there are a lot of steps in all of these pillars that I, don't have time to express here. It creates an opportunity for you to begin to experience yourself as, as a whole soul, and to step into practicing. So there's a being and a doing and a being and a doing and a being and do. So it's always both. It's, I'm doing this with my hand. We are spiral, right? We are wave. And so as we begin to step back into, oh, I am a wave, and I am constantly needing to learn to live as a wave or a spiral, then I am continually practicing being the form of human that lives in more coherence and alignment with my truth. It doesn't happen automatically. It's like, you don't find five parts, reintegrate them, they know their gift, and boom, you're awake or aligned and coherent. It's like it's a process. And so, kind of like waking up isn't, an automatic thing. We have to practice being these humans who have these capacities and learn to live them.
Yes, yes, and there is a difference how I understand it. In the way I understand awakening. Awakening is actually something that can happen in a split second,
Yeah.
and is absolute. And that doesn't mean then that the personality is fully integrated. Like, are you familiar with the Wilbur Combs lattice?
Yep.
So, and I'm a big fan of the Wilbur Combs lattice, because for me that's all that explains it so well, that the personal development that you so beautifully described, that the soul development, where we integrate and feel whole as personalities, but still here in this body mind personality, if we then can wake up on the other axis, and this waking up experience or waking up state falls upon this beautifully integrated human being, then I feel like we have the full force of what you are describing. So for me, it's both elements are so important: the development of the personality and the soul, and the waking up to the wholeness that is always already there.
Yep.
That wholeness is timeless and formless and always already there, and animates the whole personality when we are open to it, and when we have developed enough so that we can be a good carrier of that energy.
Yeah. And I'm certainly agree with everything you just said. I think one of the things that's significant in my awareness about this is that when most of us, as we are trying to wake up, because I certainly spent, years, I had a lot of very deep, spontaneous awakening experiences. And then I would step back into the real world in my constrained form, and, and experience lots of challenges. So what I think I'm describing that is, same and different, is that most of what keeps us from waking up fully and living our life, aligned and life amplified life force, is the constraints of our shadow, that unless they are fully resolved, or, most fully, again, not to suggest perfection, most fully resolved, we are more capable organically of waking up. So my
Mhm.
experience personally and with clients is that each time I reclaim a part of me that, from time space, that had a way of being in this world that was serving me, it was helping my soul uncover something that I couldn't see before. And it was a part of my personality, and it, it rubbed up against things in my life that made my life difficult, challenging. When I resolved that, I became a little more awake. I became a little more resolved. That constraint went
Mhm.
away psychically, energetically, somatically, like, like I show
Mhm.
up as a different human. And each time that happened, I have more and more and more awakeness, more awareness, more aliveness, um, more availability for source to move through me. So
Mhm.
there was not a, certainly for me, it has not been a single thing. I've had many transcendent awake experiences. They didn't necessarily resolve the human stuff. So, when I
I
just
know.
resolving shadow developmentally, I'm actually not just talking about horizontal. I'm actually also talking vertical. It's both.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because as I resolve the stuff, integrate, like I am way more available to
Mhm.
have awareness and to receive that which is living in me, living through me, living in me.
Mhm. Mhm. No,
I
that
don't
makes total sense.
know if that makes sense.
No,
And I
no, makes
actually
total
help,
sense.
you're helping me articulate this in a way I've never thought about. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very interesting, and I mean, I'm also fascinated by like the small distinctions
Uh-huh.
in
Yep.
different pathways, and how we approach this, because I mean, we are talking here high level. How could humans act differently and live differently, no? And still, there are different approaches. I
Mhm.
want to come back to a little bit to. I will not ask about community anymore, but about culture. Because
I wish you
I
could
really,
answer both questions.
yeah, yeah. No, no, it's all good. Uh, but culture in general, because when we think about third attractor, it's a four quadrant approach, and there are a few things that I would like to ask you. How do you see education and education of children in this whole development? What would need to happen there for children to already grow up in a different way? Do you have children?
I do have children, and actually, an important aspect of my own development, my own emergence in the world was raising children. I wouldn't be who I am now without having I raised four children, two mine and two stepsons.
Mm.
And I often describe my child rearing experience as a clinical trial because I came into my second marriage with my two children, and my doctorate's in human development, and I literally changed my major of, my orientation focus of my doctorate because I was growing a child. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, and like I got to figure this out. So I
Yeah.
changed to human development. And, not that I was perfect at it by any stretch, but I had some sense of what I was supposed to be doing in raising children. And my orientation was my job is a facilitator of this little being who's growing in me and who will then, emerge into the world. My job is literally to help this being become itself, not a
Mhm.
form of me, not my expectations, or, my not to fulfill my needs. Um, but an orientation to help it live its, I had two daughters, live their most authentic life according to the impulse of their spirit. So I
Yeah.
went into parenthood with that approach. And then I raised, I had two stepsons who were raised under a very different orientation values set. And I watched the four of them. Literally, I did the best I could, but children form so early, and parental values are really, a
Mm-hmm.
deep expression of what the child comes in, how they come into the world. And it was fascinating to watch their evolution and what became of them. And having had this experience, I can say that having approached it developmentally and wanting my daughters to become who they were meant to be, they did.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really critical, I feel like it's a really critical facet of what's
Mm-hmm.
missing in our culture and our educational systems, because our educational systems are so attuned to prioritizing, external parameters that, educational bodies have decided, or these are the important things that our kids are supposed to study and learn and become, machines in the machine culture in some way,
Mm-hmm.
like fit into the model of what we think humans are. And it doesn't really work.
And where would you see then? That's probably a little bit a provocative question, but I'm actually curious. Where would be the moment where this karmic soul integration would ideally happen? Because when if I understood you correctly, we come into this world, we have
Yeah.
already the karmic baggage. So
Yep.
I would assume that, yeah, how do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you work with children with that, or?
I, I don't. I love the question. Youngest people I've worked with, other than my own children, are early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked with some early 20-year-olds successfully who, were very ready to do the work. Um, it's fascinating and so really the only thing I can respond to is what I reflected on as I was raising my own kids, and what I've witnessed in them. And certainly, again, I was not a perfect parent. And because my focus was to allow them to become themselves so that they literally were then oriented to living the life that their soul brought them to live. And they
Mm-hmm.
did have, difficult challenges, difficulties. I didn't try to fix, well, I did try to fix for them when they were really small, but they very, very quickly said, Mom, stop trying to fix it. Like,
Yeah.
this is life. Like, okay. Um, I think when you orient to helping a child become themselves, they have encounters just like we do as adults that are of use, they're of service.
Mm-hmm.
And so supporting them, guiding them, literally allowing them to work out those challenges as best they can with parental, and mentoring support, they are more likely to be resolving those things they came to
Mm-hmm.
resolve. I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough that my generation, you know, we didn't know any of this, early on. And so we just suppressed and suppressed and suppressed and distanced ourselves from the challenges and put it in a box and said, oh, yeah, that's that part of me I don't bring out very often. And because we suppressed the things that were difficult and challenging, they become really powerful forces, negative, shadow forces in our lives. And so to do that as an adult, to go back and like, okay, now I really have to reclaim all that stuff that I
Mm-hmm.
pushed
Mm-hmm.
down and repressed, is tough. But it's not so tough if you haven't spent decades repressing it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I watched my kids, they're late 20s, early 30s. I've watched them evolve rapidly because I didn't force them to repress. I didn't force them to become something that wasn't them. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
constrained by external forces like lots of kids were. And so they had some tough years. They did a lot of developmental work in their teens and 20s. And I just encouraged them and, helped them find resources, and they just sort of naturally, organically began dealing with their stuff. And, not that they're perfect either. They're still doing their work. They have made it to the, green stage, and moving into the next stage. And they're doing it organically because they didn't repress.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think children are going to need the same kind of reclamation that, us adults do, because if they are allowed to be themselves.
Interesting.
No, I'd love your thoughts about that. Like, this is something I've been playing with, thinking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I So on one hand, it resonates a lot that we are coming into this life with karmic baggage or challenges or whatever. And where I personally have my doubts is that we come with an agenda, or did I misunderstand you? Like that we come into this life to work on certain things, or have our clear ideas before we come, how this life, or what this life is meant to be, or did
Yeah,
I get that wrong?
I don't believe that about our
Okay.
souls. I do think the way I hold it, is that we have, each of us has very unique, idiosyncratic, like one of a kind capacities.
Mm-hmm.
Our soul has an orientation,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, particular gifts that want to be expressed to be fully ourselves. So my gifts, my capacities, my expressions of soul will be different than yours. I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe that, purpose, our sole purpose is to have a job or a mission or a particular task, as much as to be fully expressed in its
Yeah.
organic form.
Yeah.
And
I,
because
exactly. And for me, this is a process that is kind of rolling forward, like in the way I see it, it's this constant listening to source and responding to what wants to happen from who I am, from obviously from my soul purpose, or from my personality, and then like this leaning into the next second, the next moment, this leaning into the future, and try to cultivate this ability to respond appropriately, and coherent and context aware to what needs to happen. And the more free we are, that's my experience, the more awake we are, the more free we are, the more integrated, the more whole we are, the better is our capacity to actually be able to respond in any moment to exactly what needs to happen now from us. Yeah.
yes, absolutely see it the same way.
Yeah.
I don't, um, I may have a little more awareness, in my frame about, the the what am I trying to say? The significance of our soul's calling. So spirit moves through me, but it comes through the filter of my soul. So
Mm-hmm.
I am, connected. I am spirit, and I am an individuated expression of spirit. And so my soul has an orientation to life, to the cosmos, to being human, that will have, a one of a kind expression. There is no
Mm-hmm.
other human who has my soul's purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
so you and I can have the exact same circumstance, and we would be giving different expressions in the world. And so it is useful from my perspective to gain an awareness about self and my soul,
Mm-hmm.
in order to continually be refining. Oh, that's what my soul wants to do. I haven't quite learned those skill sets yet. So, for instance, one of the facets of my soul purpose has been to speak powerful truths. And I've been doing that since I was 2 years old. Um,
Mm-hmm.
led to led to lots of challenges in this life, and all the other lifetimes. I know of many, many former lifetimes where my head was cut off because I speak powerfully. And so wasn't until I took it upon myself, given I can't help but do that. I need to learn to speak more powerfully, but, appropriately, with
Yeah, yeah.
love. And
Interesting.
I learned that I also, shining love onto shadow as opposed to holding a flashlight in someone's face. I became a professional mediator and facilitator. I
Hmm.
trained and trained and trained and read and learned the skill sets that I needed to enliven my soul, one of the facets of my soul purpose in a way that could be productive. And so it was
Hmm.
helpful for me to know about my soul and its orientation to become a better representation of that purpose. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I think it is useful to, rather than assume spirit's just going to guide me and I'm going to just listen it. And what you described is, exactly how I see it is I'm constant. It's like breadcrumbs. Everything is a
Yeah.
breadcrumb or not. Like, nope, that's not a breadcrumb, but this is. So I'm
Yeah.
moving in the direction of the breadcrumbs, right? But if I know my orientation to how do I move in that direction of the breadcrumb, I
Hmm.
can be even more service of more service.
Yeah, yeah. That makes total sense.
And that's back to the question, the notion of the negotiation that you described. When I know my soulful sourced breadcrumb, like there isn't actually, my experience is there isn't actually much negotiation that's needed because I'm not in competition with anybody ever. Like I am never in competition with another human or any other being, but because my direction is so focused and specific and nuanced, and I know what my expression needs to be, it's always in support of collaboration, with everybody else. I mean, I feel like I'm the world's greatest cheerleader. It's like, yay, you go. I'm so excited for the thing that you are about to do because it just makes the whole better and bigger and, more rich. Um, and so it's not that I assume that mine is better than anybody else's. It's just this is my way. This is the thing I'm here to do.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally understand. What you are describing is a coming together of people that are self-actualized, know exactly what their purpose is and live it fully. I think where I am coming from is from something that we try to experiment with, where the connection is first in the oneness, or again in the transcendence, and the sovereign is almost secondary, even though
Hmm. Got it. Yeah.
you get what I mean.
Yep.
It's like it's almost like a hierarchy.
Uh-huh.
Is sovereignty first, and every sovereign soul is acting for the sake of the whole, or
Uh-huh.
do you come together first in oneness, in this sense of this is consciousness that is
Uh-huh.
one, and
Yeah.
from that we see how the different souls or how the different personalities
Yeah.
contribute from that oneness. And
Yeah.
there is a slight difference
Yeah,
in
completely. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, you're right.
yeah,
And I've done both.
yeah,
Um, I think my frustration and part of why I went down this path was having been a part of so many spiritual communities that fell apart or couldn't accomplish
yeah,
what we envisioned and were fraught with the disconnect and the conflict. I've never been a part of spiritual community and not experienced conflict and
yeah.
humans butting heads with each other because, yep, we're one, and I've still got my stuff. I'm still wounded. I'm
Mhm, mhm,
still
mhm.
not quite whole. I'm still wanting to do the thing I want to do, um, not knowing specifically what that is. And I became so exhausted of that endeavor. And like I committed, what, 25 years of my life to different spiritual communities. And I would try to, like not like you who had a, very solid, I mean, I'm, in some ways envious of the experience you've had. And also this was just my path. This is what I had to experience, checked out, participated in deeply, a number of communities. And none of them did the thing that I needed. And so I just said, okay, I have to go heal myself. I have to go figure out how to be the human who can be in that community and be of greater service. And so for me, that,
But you know, I wanna respond to this because I agree with you, and I
yeah,
wanna also put it in an integral context here, because many of the spiritual community as we found them in the 90s, or yeah, the last 30 years, were still deeply rooted in blue, like
yeah,
in either
yeah,
blue hierarchy, blue structure, blue everything, blue rules, blue hierarchy, blue structure. And then a lot of postmodern green people were still attracted to the spiritual path, to the gurus, to the teachers, but they ended up being in a structure that valued hierarchy over
yeah,
sovereignty,
yeah,
and that created this experience that you
yeah,
are describing well, and I agree with that. So what I'm interested in, and Andrew and I were talking a lot about that, is
mhm,
how can this community building look like when we come out of the individualism in teal or yellow,
yeah,
and lean towards turquoise, where wholeness comes back, where after self-actualization comes
yeah,
self-transcendence.
naturally,
How
yep.
do we live that and come together in that self-transcendent state and still embodied in who we are? How does
Mm,
that look like without extreme blue structures? I mean, in introvert we want to transcend and include a little bit of blue.
yeah,
Is not bad, but without recreating the old structures. And
yeah,
I don't have the answers yet. I haven't seen it work yet fully. I mean,
yeah,
Enlightened fell apart for some of these reasons. And in the last 10 years, when we were working together, we have a small sangha, and there are indicators that it
mm,
could work, like in a very small way with a few people, where you feel like, yeah, that's how it could feel like, should feel like, but it's not born yet.
yeah. I so I was a part of a few communities that weren't rooted in blue. They were rooted in green. Thinking they were beyond that, but really they were rooted in green with a little bit of orange
Mm,
still. There was some hierarchy. So anyway, postmodern hierarchical structures, um, and still didn't work. And
yeah.
the thing that you said that feels most relevant to my experience anyway about why it didn't work was there just aren't enough people who really are, what you call integral,
Hmm. Hmm.
late subtle, early meta tier, who can hold the container.
Yeah,
And because
exactly.
you have to have enough people holding the container of the aspiration
Hmm.
to, I mean, to literally be the field in which other
Hmm.
people can evolve. And so I guess that's part of why I feel like, well, for me it didn't, like, I don't know where it is. I desperately want that, like you do probably. Like I would give anything,
Yeah.
be in a community like that. That's my aspiration. Literally, I,
Hmm.
I just kept thinking over years, well, if I if I help enough people heal, I'm going to have so many friends that I'm going to feel like I'm going to create my heaven on earth, as Martin Root would say. And
Yeah.
me, that's heaven on earth, is having enough companions who are far enough along that I can be my form of creator, help them, encourage, be the cheerleader for all the other people wanting to be their form of creator. And let's go create. Let's go
Hmm. Hmm.
build the new future. Let's build the future. It wants to be here. It is here. It's just
Hmm.
waiting for us to recognize it and remember who we really are. So I think the challenge I witness is that lots of people on this planet imagine themselves as integral, later stages, and they're not embodied. And
Hmm.
so they're living from a conceptual frame, but not an embodiment of that frame.
Hmm.
And therefore they're just, I just keep saying, there literally aren't enough of us yet who are truly living that form.
Yeah,
um, Even
I agree.
experiment with creating cultures or educational systems, or I don't personally think that we should even be talking about building new systems, cultures, communities until we've begun to live the form that can create the new forms of those things. Like it scares me to think, well, let's go create new things. Like, but we're still creating them from the same paradigm. We're still creating them from our wounded selves. We're still creating them from materialism rather than
Mhm.
an enlivened, animate paradigm and being the whole beings, the aligned, the awake beings. Um,
I, yeah, that makes so much sense what you're saying. And I think I want to, I wish we could find a way to do both, because it's also like, if you are just doing it individually, you don't have the support of the community or of the sangha. I also see a lot of support capacity in a sangha to help each other, to be more clear, to see more of the shadow, to be more awake, to stay awake, to help each other to grow.
yeah,
And that only works when
yeah.
you try it.
You know,
But it's hard.
and I agree completely. It has to be both. We can't do one or the other. We have to keep experimenting and pushing the edges of the envelope. I did remember a community I was in that was extraordinarily unique and probably further along developmentally and every other way. Um, I started, my guides forced me to start doing plant medicine a number of years ago. Like I was so opposed to it, not going to do it, and and they kept saying no, 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 and then ultimately I was told, yep, you needed to try these things. I joined one of the Peruvian-based churches, ayahuasca
Mm-hmm.
churches in the U.S., and because I like, why not? Like, why not try it? Um, this particular community, it was a Santo Daime community, was the most coherent, aligned, co-creative, regenerative community I've ever experienced in my life. Um,
Mm.
and I went in with a lot of trepidation, like, my scientist hat. I'm going to witness what's going on here. And literally, I would stand outside. I would be a part of a ceremony and witness, like, oh my God, what's happening here is so remarkable. And so what happens when in the ceremonies, and they're 6 to 10 hours of being together, singing, chanting, dancing, and using ayahuasca. And the role of the ayahuasca, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on plant medicine, and I'm certainly not, proposing everybody should do it. Just it was a unique experience and that it liberated people from their typical constrained selves.
Mm.
They entered into this container, and the singing, the dancing, the chanting created coherence, like
Mm.
literally create, like meditation would, but it
Mm.
created an embodied form because they were singing, dancing, chanting. Like it literally created an embodied coherence that persisted through time. And
Mm.
first couple times, I'm like, oh my, I'm actually watching the energy of the experience. Like, oh my gosh, this is actually creating coherence. So within and then without, between.
Mm.
And these communities literally create magic. Um,
Mm.
I've just like, you know, it's an interesting experiment, not for everybody. Um, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it formed my work. Like I really began to understand, reading esoteric texts and reading quantum physics, trying to understand all of the elements required to begin to live in an embodied form, this, you know, whole aligned, amplified self, that it requires us all to be in a coherent state initially internally, and then we develop this coherence between us, and then we are literally transported out of our current version of reality. Superposition occurs, and then synchronicity occurs.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I don't have any experience with ayahuasca, but in our intersubjective dialogue work,
Mhm.
where we where we enter these kind of states of
Yeah.
coherence in a group of people. That's the closest to where we get to a sense how it could work. We practice it like meditation practice. We practice intersubjective non-duality, and when a group is used to do it, they can enter that space of coherent where the egos are out and all the authentic selves or the liberated awake selves are in, and it feels like one voice speaking through each and every one of them, and at the same time the individuals don't lose anything. There is nothing that is lost because their full expression is still there, and at the same time they feel fully whole with the whole group. And that's the closest for me to having an idea how this new culture could look like, when we can stay in that space together and create from there.
Yeah. I love what you just described. I've had limited experience with that. I mean, I did a lot of um, um, we work. It's not we work. Collective work when I was in the Bay Area. Um, and I think it had, there were some structural issues like you described earlier, that kept it from being as effective as what you've described your experience.
Yeah.
I I love what you've just suggested as a potential technology that could amplify the collective. I'm creating a community in this new work, and my intent is to create community, like literally, truly, like you just
Mm-hmm.
described, as a part of the initiative. Like the people who show up and are doing their deep individual also will be part of something that forms. This was a vision I got about 10 years ago, and the vision that came in that was sourced through me was what we need is to create a collective container that is a toroidal energy. It's sacred geometry. It's
Yeah.
literally us showing up as our most profoundly available selves and then creating together a
Yeah.
regenerative form that can then, collectively create as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah, some thoughts
the
about,
beauty of this practice is that you actually then find out if people are there or if they are just
yeah,
faking it. You know what
right.
I mean? I mean, I've heard many people talk that they are living from source,
Yeah,
and turns out it was probably the source of their animated ego or creative ego, or
yeah,
like, because I mean it's a fine line between a beautiful creative ego creating their own
yep,
vision and actually living from source, which always also has to do with a surrender to source
yes,
and responding, and not that kind of doing that the ego is
yeah,
doing. So,
yeah.
and when you have this so-called we work or the intersubjective dialogue work, then you find out.
You do, you really do. And
Yes, you
and then
really
look
do.
back to your question, right? Earlier question about, and what do you do then? Like, you have people who are at different levels of
Mm-hmm.
readiness
Mm-hmm.
to live that form. And everybody's beautiful. Like everybody is perfect wherever they are. There's nothing wrong with all that, certainly. But we're not creating I mean, I guess in a sense, we are beginning to create third attractor communities,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the energy and the culture of that new form potentially will carry everybody. Like, that's what we probably all imagine.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
No, potentially at one point. But even when we just talk people that are actually conscious of what they are doing and come together, even then you have these developmental differences.
Yep.
And in that sense, you only need to train people to have a sense for these developmental differences and acknowledge them. Because if you have a group of people that actually are aware who in every moment just has the kind of the highest vibration or the highest consciousness or the highest expression of wants to be expressed, if everybody has cultivated this sense, for where the verticality goes. Where is the real verticality? And I'm not talking one single person. I'm talking moment to moment, being sensitive. Where is the highest truth expressed?
Where does it show up?
And that's the only thing you need. And then you can have a group with different levels of development or depth, or however we want to call it. And it still can work if everybody is aware of it's almost like aware of their position in the whole, because we never will be all the same and in every respect. Yeah. Yep. And then also this aspect of, then you take the same group, exactly the same group, out of the, let's say, spiritual context, and you organize a retreat with a lot of practicals. In that sense, then everybody has to be aware, oh, who is now the hierarchy? Who has now the highest wisdom in terms of organizing meals and accommodation and prizes and marketing, this, that, and the other thing. And then the whole thing has to shift. With the same people, you get a different verticality, a different hierarchy.
Yeah.
That's why we call it natural hierarchy. And when everybody is out of their ego in their awakened self, then we actually see where is highest wisdom, highest insights for the task at hand, not theoretically, but for the task at hand.
I love what you're describing. Yeah, we're going to have to talk some more about that. So I think what you're describing is definitely a technology that is needed, when you have the ability to bring together people who are either, in a more ready state, they've moved along the continuum of all the, wholeness aligned, awakened, amplified selves, and have an aspiration of creating together.
Yeah, exactly.
Really important. And I mean, that's really what we are. I mean, everything, we've just described is the definition of a third attractor.
Yeah. Totally.
Just we're all, many of us are just experimenting about what that looks like. And there's no right or wrong experiment. They're just all experiments at this point. And may we all be so bold as to keep experimenting and bringing in new forms of optimal conditions where more and more of us can be prepared to step into, significant roles to help facilitate the rest of humanity. That's kind of, I don't pretend to have the answer. I have a form of a response that has worked for me and for clients for, a couple decades now. And I just I've been told very loudly, clearly, like, you have to bring this in the world. Like, okay, I'll do my best. That's all I can.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just a servant.
That was also the motivation for me to do this conversation series, because I think there are so many different approaches out there, and it's so cool to learn from each other's experiences, and in the end we all grow together.
Yeah. Well, I think there's another conversation for us. I want to hear more and think about how what you just described and do might fit into my work. Like, that's not something I've thought about really. So
yeah, let's have another conversation. That's probably for now a good end point, no? And let me just. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really great.
Yeah, this was great, Daniela. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. And I thank you so much for hosting all these conversations. They're fascinating. I'm learning a lot and,
yeah, me too.
Looking at all the different perspectives and assumptions, and, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.